Avatar: The Last Airbender, Smoke and Shadow Issue 2. Aang tells his fans good job, and somehow one of them fell asleep even though he was sitting up in a meditating stance. But Aang doesn't mind and reassures him. He thanks Iroh for letting them meet at his shop, and Aang gets told it's time to ride Appa. If it weren't for the nice moments here, the scene would be pointless. His friends got stuff packed for him. Predictably, a bird stops Aang from leaving because it's carrying Zuko's letter. He hugs Katara and she thanks Iroh, and Zuko thanks Aang and calls him buddy. I love how much friendlier he is with him in the comics. I get bored until eventually Aang's given actually important exposition. And May's father goes up to Zuko, who's nice enough to say he's got the right to be informed on this. He says the kidnapping is entirely because Tom Tom doesn't live with him, even though he should know he was kidnapped for Ukaru being a failure, which would happen regardless of which house he lived in. So he's just saying this to try to persuade May that he's right. Why does he think everyone knows the spirit world begins to act up when the human world is weak? The spirits throw tantrums when the humans are too strong, if anything, because they're doing stuff they don't like. Rather than just saying that with general iron as proof, Aang lampshades this nonsense, and Zuko's told he should declare a curfew to try to keep the citizens safe from dark spirits kidnapping at night, and then send out a task force to fight them. After all, if the citizens are all in their homes at night, the task force won't have to worry about protecting people that are outside. So while the citizens would hate this idea, as Aang says, he's got a good point. He's not bringing up any other idea that he should do. Aang has to remind Zuko that you can't use bending against spirits, so a task force would be useless. If it's useless, then you might as well just send non-benders who are trained in other forms of fighting. How does Ukaru not already know this instead of asking for a task force of benders? Spirits are beings people other than the Avatar have to put up with, so it's not just the Avatar who would know about them. Aang says they should figure out exactly what happened to Tom Tom first, and Zuko agrees. But he already knows, really. Zuko has an idea about how to find out more about the old legend. And somehow May says she'll need her father to take care of Tom Tom because she just assumes his house is impossible to break into, even though she hated that he was trying to raise him to hate Zuko. This is kind of dumb. Ukana's told he means no disrespect by the one escorting him out, who sympathizes with him and what happened. There doesn't need to be so many panels of Ki being mean to her mom. I got it the first few times. You don't need to do it more than once. Eventually the heroes go up to a fire sage, and Zuko says sorry because he's been away for a long time. The sage has very boring, predictable blathering and gets told to use bending to let them progress already. I'm not sure why Sazin is the first Fire Lord to be arrogant enough to want the history before him to be sealed off to everyone but him. Why did the Kyoshi warriors think they could do anything against the spirits? Ursa hugs her daughter, relieved that she's safe, and I'm glad she doesn't get written to complain about it. There's a surprise because Aang and Zuko failed, and Kay and May are the ones who unlock the door. Eventually the father tells Ukano that because of what just happened to him, they can't wait for Zuko to act. And Aang says not all of Zuko's ancestors look cranky. They see a mural of the evil spirits. What's the point of having a ship tease moments for a ship that was already sunk? A lot of the fans stopped caring about this, and you've already given May a good boyfriend. They find out warlords used to be the ones ruling the Fire Nation, and when a village refuses to pay tribute to one of them, the warlord had all the village's kids kidnapped permanently. And I'm supposed to believe this magically had their mothers die from it. Then the history explains that dark spirits began to haunt the warlord and his men. Are they supposed to be alive or not? If so, why is this part of the history being told to us? The spirits started kidnapping a kid from the warlord's camp once a night. So his soldiers abandoned him and his regime collapsed. Aang assumes May summoned something by reading out the scroll, so he eventually decides to follow the white trail of light. The curfew starts being enforced without Zuko's permission. At least the citizens aren't getting told that it is his idea. Why doesn't the old man believe in the spirits business in a world with spirits in it? Eventually the curfew enforcers decide to stop the kidnappers. May gets flattered by Kay about how pessimistic she is. It's so convenient that as soon as we get a story where Kay's supposed to be sympathetic, All of a sudden, the art portrays him as not being ugly anymore. Eventually, Kay has to unlock another door in the creative way he did before. It's smart of Aang to tell him to follow him in case he needs him again. It's nice of Zuko to offer to give May some more light. He also admits that Kay seems nice. I like that he's not acting jealous. He says it's good to see her happier than before, but he misses her. Yeah, why did he have to say that? He'd know how she'd react. This just happens to have more padding where they argue in a completely predictable, unentertaining way. Avatar isn't supposed to be about romance drama. The problem with romance drama is that it's the same few things over and over, so it's always cliche and one of the laziest forms of drama there is. You can't do anything creative with it. May says Kay likes her more than she likes him, and that's what she needs because she doesn't want to be heartbroken again. I respect how smart that is. I just miss having characters in fiction that I can relate to because they're smart, consistently, in a way that benefits them. Aang gets talked to by one of the real Khmuris, who explains that the hauntings are what caused the Fire Islands to be united into one nation because the first Fire Lord brought the warlords to justice and started an era of peace. I don't think it's a good writing decision to have ghosts be responsible for a part of history and be confirmed to exist in the world. Because now I'm wondering why ghosts didn't overthrow Ozai. They were perfectly happy with harassing a warlord and the innocent people who lived with him. So why didn't Ozai's many victims get back at him? Why didn't Katara's mother come back as a ghost? No franchise really establishes what the rules are for who gets to come back as a ghost. You could say literally anybody has unfinished business. For one thing, nobody's gotten to experience all the fiction they'd like to. Besides, literally everywhere in the world has been populated at some point. So there should be ghosts everywhere, including the royal palace. Aang has to be reminded that he was told that these spirits did not return to the human world. Zuko wonders if the kidnappers are just different spirits posing as them. Aang rides on Appa with his friends and sees the curfew enforcers who give them exposition. Did we really need to see anything they were doing before Aang discovered them? No! It's just for padding. Even though they could make just as much money off of having a new story arcs issue instead of an issue 3 of this. And based on how YouTube works, I'm sure they'd make even more money that way. Because as the series goes on, there's always going to be people giving up on it. The comics industry should be making arcs shorter, because issue 1s are more profitable. Their previous scenes didn't involve the main characters, so there's really no reason to show them. Eventually it's revealed that these enforcers did save a child. It's almost like the Khmuris were trying to lose. Most of the scene's a waste of time. Zuko's annoyed enough by his life to suspend this guy for doing this without his authority. He's already known for doing stuff because of his pride. I think this might backfire on him. It softens the blow that he says he's sorry about it. He demands this group to disband. Aang lamentates that it was pretty harsh, and he says he hated to do it but had no choice. Why did I have to see someone lecture him after Aang did? Eventually May apologizes to Kay and kisses him and thanks him. It's annoying when you don't know how a character's name is supposed to be pronounced. I guess Kay's lying about her mother being freezing, because if she's asleep by this point, she wouldn't still be scared. Eventually Zuko has a sweet moment carrying his sister on his back, and doesn't tell her what he has to deal with to avoid scaring her. At least all of the kidnapped children look happy. One of them is coloring, and they've got some toys. It immediately tells you that the bad guys were well-intentioned. She gets comforted and shown affection. Tama hugs his dad, asking if he's made friends with the other kids, and he gets shown affection for a while. I wish Sonic villains were written with this level of nuance, instead of nuance being called something only adult fiction has. The Avatar comics had nuance since The Promise. And Tom's smart enough to know he's lying to reassure him. Then the story starts being boring and wasting my time again. He worries about Tom and sees smoke from Key's room because she got kidnapped. At least Ursa didn't have to witness it. Aang jumps to the conclusion they're not spirits because he was kicked by what looked like a human foot. Why does he think no spirits ever have human feet? They have all sorts of different appearances. Besides, if the Khmuri spirits were once humans, of course they'd have human feet. It's so stupid that he just conveniently jumps to the conclusion that they aren't spirits because the writer wanted him to. The story ends with one of them lightning bending, making them assume it's Azula, even though bending originally came from a spirit, that being the lion turtles. So there's no reason that spirits in general wouldn't be capable of bending. Why couldn't they have had this be why they figured out the truth? At least not so bad then, because it really doesn't matter. And coming to this conclusion early didn't affect the plot. Why is there so much padding in these comics? Obviously I always know what the point of the padding is, and what the point of problems in the story is. But it doesn't actually have a point if the point's only to remind me of something I already know. And it's not doing anything I love, and you could get rid of it and be missing nothing, and only make the story better to go through. It's impossible for me to fully take a story seriously if it keeps boring me. Avatar: The Last Airbender, Smoke and Shadow, Issue 3. Zuko tells Azula to do something when he should know she'd never listen, and he reminds her it can redirect lightning. Somehow she fires it at him anyways, even though he redirected it in an earlier issue. And somehow he fails to redirect it, and gets slammed against the wall by it, despite the writer knowing he can redirect it. Not to mention lightning isn't solid. Instead of Aang using airbending against her, I have to assume he doesn't get the chance because one of the Kyoshi warriors attacks her instead, and so he thinks he has to do nothing to avoid blowing her away too. I guess one of Zuko's original bodyguards would have done the same thing. Why didn't she just do nothing to let Aang prevent the plot? Why didn't she tell him to do something? Instead the bad guys get away for no reason. Aang should have been written to have already gone home to go to bed at this point, because it's night. It's bad enough that airbenders can't fly, even though they can have air balls below them, so I don't see why they can't hover higher up than that. It makes sense that a lot of people are planning to leave the city. Mei hugs Zuko, and finally someone points out that the lightning bending doesn't necessarily mean it's Azula. And it has to be explained that they assume it's her because of the way she moved and font. They know her well enough to see that, and I didn't because it's been years since I saw the show. And I don't tend to notice minor details like that. Mei tells him her dad's the leader of the new Ozai society. The story's boring by being nothing but talking. It's too bad it has to be like this. Zuko admits he understands someone being loyal to family, after being prodded into it, and she speculates that her dad is working with Azula, and she says she keeps getting given the feeling that he's doing all this for a benefit. She says feeling even though he outright told her it was that way. So why wouldn't she just be honest to make him look better? Zuko decides to have Ukano arrested. Aang says this isn't the way and plans to talk with him, even though it's obvious that he can't be reasoned with at this point. He comes off like he's against Zuko arresting literally anybody. Does he want to arrest anybody? What is he supposed to do then? Zuko thanks him for his help up to this point in a failed attempt to make up for being pragmatic instead. The story gets more padding in it. It's worth it because it was cool to see Ki talk to one of the kidnappers the way she did. The previous kidnapped person looked too much like her. We see that the spirits are people in costumes, and one of them is realistically impatient with all of this. Azula reveals that they're people she broke out of the institution she was in, so that they'd owe her and follow her. While it's shocking and depressing that Ukano emptied his bank account to build his headquarters, he did deserve it for going to side with Azula, and it's great writing that actually explains why they have this place to themselves. It could have just as easily been written that they're just occupying a conveniently abandoned building. I can't say I wouldn't have taken that seriously because that's what I was assuming and I wasn't complaining about it. This is more care put into the writing, but it's meaner to Ukano. He feels bad for his son, and he's told to incite a riot and complains about being potentially unnecessary. But I get why Azula would want this just in case it is necessary. He thinks she's planning to put Ozai back on the throne instead of herself, and he was wrong. He just believed what he wanted to believe. Because he should have known that she wouldn't put someone who's no longer a firebender on the throne. Who didn't let her be the Phoenix King. I guess he doesn't know about the Phoenix King business. Eventually, Tai explains that she used to play a hide-and-seek with Azula and she never won a game against her because she would push against the wall to hide in a secret chamber, she reveals. It's depressing to see a civilian be mad about someone trying to look for Ukano in her home when Aang already explained that this would only create even further distrust for Zuko. People get annoyed by the soldiers, so eventually a fight breaks out. Even Kay gets surrounded by the soldiers, even though he hasn't worked for Ukano in a long time. Iroh thanks someone. Somehow someone thought the holiday he established would just be a one-time thing. The story's boring now. Why have this theme? Zuko gets given the bad news and does something to try to comfort Mai. Zuko grabs the conflict ball and arbitrarily assumes that because Kay was arrested, he must deserve to be arrested. If he recently did something to deserve arrest, then it would make sense. So he's just assuming that the writing makes sense. But the situation even happening is forced. But it doesn't matter because he tells the general to release him anyways. That's how you make forced drama harmless. It's annoying, but the annoyance fades in just panels instead of ruining the story. Kay even gets back at him because he tells him that he knows this was because he was jealous of him dating Mai. Which is not what I thought this was about, because he never acted jealous of it before. But at least that explains it. People can change their minds and attitudes. And he hugs Mai. Aang calls Zuko buddy. That's always nice, it could have easily not been there. Aang uses airbending to force Zuko to go with him. I'm proud of him for being so smart and having the guts to do this. He shows him the secret passageway. Ukano tells Azula that he did what he was told and so he wants the kids to be let go. She seems to agree and gets thanked. She says that if she released him, the kids would go back to their parents and a few of them would lead the Fire Lord's forces here and expose her and her minions. So she takes that as an excuse to keep the kids there. But the damage was already done against Zuko's reputation. It doesn't necessarily require people still thinking that the Kumaris are actual spirits. Nothing that matters happens for a while. Zuko goes to the royal family graveyard. He says he's been here before, even though he never took the secret passageway before. So I have to assume he went here a different way earlier. And that there's a death in the family causing him to go here in the first place. Eventually I see Ukano show regret for what he did, and the kids hear him sobbing on the other end of the door. I assume they know what he said then. I hate that their only reaction is to the crying and not to the fact that he said all of that. Eventually, Kay firebends a hole in the door. Because the door and walls can even be damaged by fire, it'd be impossibly stupid of the bad guys to bother kidnapping firebenders, who would have already done this. So I have to assume that the only kids who were kidnapped were ones that people knew were non-benders. Because I'm thinking bullshit right now, even though this is a cool reveal for her. Both of her kids were benders, so it makes sense. I assume that her family didn't know she was a bender, that she only started bending because of Zuko, and she's so young that that's why this is a new thing for her. She doesn't come off as someone easily discouraged, so I don't know why she gave up on trying to firebend until she met Zuko. She had no reason to just assume that she was a non-bender until this point, because every kid would have tried to figure out if they were a bender as early as they could. The name of Mei's dad is so unintuitive. Ukano of course plans to lead the kids to safety. Meanwhile, there's a completely uninteresting fight scene with the heroes and Azula's team. I don't care because I don't see any of the bad guys get hit. Azula taunts Mai and reminds her of a point in their childhood where she manipulated Mai into doing something that made her feel bad. And she heard her just happen to say the name of the evil spirits in her sleep out of fear. So that's why she got the idea to imitate them. But she clearly could have gotten this idea without that memory because everyone knows about them already. This just wasted my time. Eventually, I at least get to see Kay headbutt Azula. Eventually, Zuko calls out Azula and she ends up running away. And Kay says he got hurt again. Mei's dad unintentionally leaves the kids to the bad guys anyways. Then Urza does some more angsty about her daughter hating her. She reveals that she made her doll for her and she's been ignoring it since her face changed back. Which is weird because she made that for her when she had, as far as Kay was concerned, her original face. so you'd think she would still value the doll. Unless she literally only hates her because she decided to change her face back. When I thought she was mad at her because she thought she was replaced with an imposter. So that would make Key a lot less sympathetic. We already knew about this conflict. Iroh gets asked how he got over the loss of his son, and he says he'll never get over it. His advice to her is too vague. Aang's attacks aren't satisfying to see for the most part. The closest there is to an attack with satisfying impact is the earthbending one, and flashes censor the impact. So it's no wonder I don't feel anything from this fight. Aang sees the kids, and Zuko's relieved that Azul is feeling better. Eventually Aang coughs because he took a breath at the wrong time. It better be explained how they can generate smoke. Aang gets saved by Mei and Ki, but I don't get to see their attacks impact the bad guys. Aang thanks them and Mei hugs her brother, and we get to see her dad smile at this. Eventually, the useless patting stops when Azula says she knows she'll never be Fire Lord, and realizing that she wasn't meant to be got her to feel better. She decided that her destiny was to try to make Zuko rule through fear. And she says she already got him to act ruthless. She wants him to become like her so that in a sense she will be Fire Lord again. So her motivation makes sense. I understand why she'd be called too cartoony for wanting to make him evil. But sadly it's realistic because there are some people who will support evil leaders of a country because they're strong, because they rule through fear, and make an excuse for it based on their own fear that there would be bad consequences if they didn't. Of course, if Zuko is evil, he'd send an assassin after her. But she's always been confident, so of course she would think she could easily avoid that assassination. If she was too asleep because it was so late at night, she wouldn't. But I guess it's believable that she doesn't care if this gets her killed. Because all she wants is this. She's fine with the idea of him ruling instead of her if the Fire Nation's still being ruled how she'd rule anyways. And plus, her life sucks anyways. Zuko hugs Ki, and Mei talks to her dad, saying that she'll remember him for the fact that he was brave in the end. I feel bad for him getting arrested. I have to remind myself that it's good that this happens because Zuko needs to make an example out of him instead of sending the message that he won't punish his enemies and encourage more of them to act out. And because he might still support Ozai. And I have to remind myself what he even did wrong because he spent all the arc doing nothing. I think we're supposed to believe Azula and her friends wouldn't have had a place to take the kids and to hide away themselves if it weren't for him. But they could have just found some convenient abandoned building like in a lot of works of fiction. Zuko thanks the civilians for meeting with him, and one of the most memorable parts of the arc happens as he makes a heartwarming speech that admits he was wrong and why he was wrong, and asks people for their forgiveness without expecting a response. He didn't need to reiterate why it was that the last few days had been traumatic for all of them. He says his people should never feel like prisoners or suspects and resolves to do better. It's clear from Azula's annoyed face that she was being sarcastic when calling this touching. He was still making the only decision that seemed smart at the time. He didn't know where he was supposed to go to save his sister. And that wasn't his fault. Out of complete nowhere, Mei cries because of Kay, who says he'll never go near Mei again. It was foreshadowed a little because he said he kept getting hurt around her. This wouldn't seem stupid at first glance if we got to read him explaining that, instead of the writer being too lazy to write his breakup speech. Which he could have had the comic space for if he didn't waste it. After how devoted he was to her to the point of constantly meeting up with her to try to get her trust, and telling her stuff about his gang's evil plan, it comes out of nowhere that his loyalty to her wasn't ironclad. It makes sense that getting hurt a lot would be a deal breaker for someone, even though it doesn't seem like there's any reason he'd get hurt again after this. It could very easily be that Mei will never be in danger again and thus put him in danger. She was only in danger because she happened to have a kid brother. I think the writer thought Mei deserved this because Kay likes her more than she likes him, and she's knowingly dating someone for that reason. Selfish doesn't necessarily mean evil, it means neutral. She was being smart. This was blatantly unnecessary cruelty, both to Mei and any fans that supported her relationship. Even if she is a bad girlfriend. Good for Kay that he won't be put in danger again though. He should date someone else. Most other girls wouldn't be constantly unemotional or dour around him and would show him affection more frequently. She won't be happy with Zuko either because he doesn't instantly inform her on everything. And I have to remind myself of that fact to remember that it's good that she doesn't get back together with Zuko after this. Because otherwise I would be thinking, what's the point of writing this if it's not gonna ever get back together with Zuko? So the point of the breakup is to be nicer to Kay, this OC, than May, who's from the show. So she probably has more fans. It's an understandable, well-intentioned writing decision, but I hate that I have to linger so long on a panel with no dialogue trying to do all the work for the story and justifying it. A lot of people will just hate this and not see any good in it. Ursa decides to go meet with Ozai to face her fears so that she won't be as afraid of him. He says that if he escapes prison and gets in the position of real power again, he'll do stuff she won't be able to handle. She says he's a small man trying to act big. This is trying to be a good moment, but there's no way he would be sitting. And that's the only reason why she's at a higher height than him. So the imagery isn't actually as clever as it thinks it is. She says his heart's too small, and it's too bad that's all she has to say. But her saying what she thinks that's bad would be too on the nose. It would be a complete waste of time, too. And I guess she knows that. It's satisfying that he stutters and begs for her to act afraid of him, and she just ignores him. But it would have been as satisfying as it's supposed to be if we saw his face. The story ends with Key calling her mommy again, being glad she's back, and not minding that she hugs her because she was kidnapped earlier. So, Zula saved the day there? This issue is by Jean Yang, and at Tom and Key get kidnapped. Well, Aang gets given exposition we never needed to know, considering that he finds out the kidnappers aren't spirits anyways. The revelation that the people kidnapping children aren't spirits makes the first issue confusing, because I'm wondering how these people fake sounding like spirits. The only reason they have different looking text bubbles is because it's a narrative cheat to trick the audience. Was it really necessary to make us think they were spirits until now? The arc would have been just as appealing without trying for a plot twist. It makes it seem like the plot of the arc overall was too basic, if the only plot twist is completely unnecessary. It doesn't matter. It's not a bad story, but it's usually distracting how much it likes wasting my time. Maybe they could have had the padding be showing a whole bunch of slapstick against the cloaked people, because they do get stopped from kidnapping one person. This issue by Jean Yang is about the heroes rescuing the kids because Ty Lee led them to a secret passageway to lead them to them, and May and Kay fought off some of the bad guys in their way. We never got to see any slapstick against them with actual impact, and barely got to see even that. So the action wasn't good enough. It was just there. It'd suck if it wasn't there, but it's something kind of boring that you're impatient during waiting for the plot to actually progress. There were good moments in this issue, of course, mainly at the ending. None of them were relevant to the plot overall, though. As usual, it was a good story that was boring at times. And if padding is usually the only problem with a series, not plot holes and characterization, that's a great series.